you have a copy of God's Word, can you turn in it to Daniel chapter 6? Daniel chapter 6. Now, if you will, while you're turning, I have a few questions for you, because, Anthony would be a little proud of this question, but what have we been learning over the past few weeks? Anybody? Answer. Open-ended answer.
The armor of God.
The armor of God. Okay, you got to be confident when you say that. You can't be like, you got to be confident. What have we been learning about, studying about the past few Sunday mornings?
The armor of God.
There you go. Because with confidence we can say that. Now, if you haven't been here, what you might be thinking is these people are crazy. They're actually thinking there's an armor that we have to put on every single day that's physical, shiny, and we got to go back to the dollar store. But rather, this is a physical, or this is not physical armor, but rather a spiritual armor. See, this armor, it transforms us from the inside out. Because Jesus resides within inside of us, and this physical armor is the gift of God that He's giving us to keep us high in defense and high in attack. You see, the thing is He's given us the Word of God to attack with, and He's given us each individual piece of armor to protect each individual part of our spirit, our soul, our mind, our body, etc. The amazing thing about this thing is this spiritual armor is that although it transforms us from the inside, what it also does is it also begins to change the world around us, and it begins to change and transforms the hearts and the minds of the people that we come in contact with. See, that's the most amazing thing about this armor, is that it doesn't just change us, it changes the world. So, as we get into this today, I want us to know that with this armor that we've been studying, we must know that if we are to have an armor, if we have an armor available to us, then we must each and every day faithfully put it on daily. Okay, so let me say that one more time. We must faithfully put on the armor of God daily.
Amen.
Okay, so this armor that we must faithfully put on, what does this word faithfully mean? Because we understand the armor now, but this word faithfully, what does it mean? When I think of the word faithful, I think of a very national landmark, which is called Old Faithful, right? Now, how many of you realistically, raise your hand, have seen it live and in person, Old Faithful, the geyser? Wow, that's more than I thought. That is a lot. Okay, I wish I could see it. I'm just too poor to go there. So, just saying. But so the beautiful thing about Old Faithful, as from the video, is that it's not even the most incredible geyser in the world because of the geyser. Okay, because of this 185 foot like height of the water that it spouts up. It's not the fact that it's the most predictable geographic location and landmark of all. That every 63 minutes, precisely, it begins to erupt. That's not even the most amazing part about this geyser. The most amazing part is what happens way before the eruption ever happens. The most amazing part is underground. Now, if you've ever kind of studied these geysers or looked into them, I'm not going to give you the huge scientific situation because I don't even understand it myself. But what I do understand is that there's these giant vats and reservoirs under this geyser, and from the bottom, there are maybe 2 or 3 or 4 pipings that begin to shoot up hot, boiling water. Water that is so hot that if you jumped into it, you would not want to be in it for long. And the idea is it fills up these reservoirs. And from the top of the reservoirs, there's cool water, maybe from the mountains or from the area around, and it's cooler water. And as you begin to mix this with a hole only probably, I don't know, about that big, it begins to heat and heat. And as we understand, when water begins to heat and it begins to bottle up, it begins to pressurize. And that pressure eventually, as you would shake a bottle, and you shake it up, and eventually once you pop that top, it's going to erupt. But see, if none of that happened before the eruption would not go 185 feet, but maybe a foot. The idea is it has to happen, everything before must happen, and it must happen precisely in order for this eruption to be great and mighty and be able to hit the heights that we see and we desire. See, today we are studying in Daniel. We're studying Daniel in Daniel chapter 6. And this man Daniel is one of the most faithful people that I've seen in the Bible besides Jesus and besides Paul and all these people. He stands all sorts of people. And he is faithful. Before anything ever happens, he's faithful. In the midst of trial, he's faithful. And so as we get into this, let's kind of look at this. If you read with me in verse 6, or chapter 6, verse 1, it says, "It pleased Darius Now I want to stop there real quick because I want you to understand that Darius is not Daniel, okay? Most of you understand this, but most of you may not know that the whole process before Darius. You see, Darius is a new king. Can you say new king?
New king.
New king. Okay, I make my youth do this, so I know you're awake because I might get a little boring, so I apologize. So here's the deal: is Darius was this new king, and see the thing is that in chapter 5, this new king had come. The interesting thing is that Belshazzar, this king before, this king of Babylon, well, essentially, I'm going to sum it up for you. Read it. It's great. It's an awesome story, but long story short, he dies. Great, awesome. Babylon dies with him, and the Medes and the Persians come in, they conquer, and they set up Darius as ruler. And what happens when a government comes in? When a new government, when a new rule comes in and they start to take over, they usually leave the old government in place and say, you guys do what you want, right? So, for example, Russia comes and invades America. God willing, it doesn't happen. But it happens. Do they just go, okay, American politicians, you're good, stay in power? No, what do? They begin to change it. They begin to set up new order, new rule, new government, new people that they trust. So as we continue reading, it says it pleased Darius to do this, to set over the kingdom 120 satraps or governors to be throughout the whole kingdom. And over them 3 high officials, of whom Daniel was one, to whom these satraps should give account, so that the king might not suffer loss. Now what I want you to understand about this is, again, this new king, this new rule, this new government came in, they set up their own rules, they set up people that they trust. 120 such people. And then 2 out of the 3 high officials were people that, again, were trusted. They were probably Medes or Persians, people that they had trusted and known, and they were loyal to the king. And they were all set up so that the king might not suffer loss. Plain and simple, the king didn't want to lose his money, didn't want to lose his investments. The king didn't want to lose his land. So he set up a new government. This makes sense, right? We understand this, correct? But what's interesting is the fact that Daniel was mentioned. Because Daniel is an exile of Judah. Daniel is an exile from a foreign land that has been put into a situation that he might not like. You see, the thing is Daniel might be a traitor. I mean, we don't know. Daniel at this point to Darius could have been someone who could have lost him money, could have lost his investments, could have had his own heart and mind on his mind. Does this make sense? It's the fact that Daniel is mentioned as an overseer. He becomes someone that is even in the government. This is shocking. This is crazy because Darius shouldn't be doing this. But what I want you to understand is that not only is he in the government, but rather if you read verse 3, then this Daniel became distinguished above all the other high officials and satraps because of an excellent spirit which was in him. And the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. Then the high officials and the satraps, they sought to find a ground for complaining against Daniel with regard to the kingdom, but they could find no ground for complaint or any fault because he was faithful and no error or fault was found in him. Now if you have your sermon bulletin, you'll see that I clearly marked it, we must be faithful. And I put on there before the trials, because before the trials, this must happen. Before the trials, we will see that Daniel, before any trial came, he was faithful. And your first blank is in our actions, in his actions. You see, how I understand this is that he was established not just in the government, but above all others in the government. He was established, he was trusted. And the reason he was trusted was because he had a what? If you read in verse 3, he had a what? An excellent spirit. Now, an excellent spirit. He clearly just had like this awesome spirit that was like glowing all the time. They were like, check that guy out. He's really awesome. Right? I don't know. I wasn't looking at him. But the idea is this excellent spirit is that what I like to call he had integrity. Okay, so we understand that an excellent spirit is integrity. I see this because if you read in verse 4, it says that he was faithful with no error or fault found in him, according to the kingdom. When these men came to try to focus on him and fight him and try to find grounds against him to throw him down, the idea is that he had no ground and no complaint. They could find nothing because he had what we call integrity. Now, integrity is being humble, it's being honest, it's being trustworthy. It's finding yourself in the hard and pressing situations, in all situations, whether easy to get away with or easy just to be in. Whatever situation, you're honest, humble, and trustworthy. And this was Daniel. And this is why the king set him above all else. It's interesting because this integrity we have, if you read in Proverbs 28:18, which you don't have to flip there, but I'm going to read it to you. It says, "Whoever walks in integrity will be delivered, but he who is crooked in his ways will suddenly fall." You see, Daniel is not going to fall. In Proverbs 28:18, Daniel's not going to fall because he has integrity. And as I'm going through this and I was reading this, you see, he was, again, faithful in his actions. So to us, what does this mean? How do we see this? Well, Christian, in your actions, you must be faithful. In your actions, when you put on the armor of God daily, it means that when you deal with the world, you must be faithful to God and faithful and have integrity. Faithful in your actions. Does this make sense?
Amen.
Are you with me? Okay, so here's where we're going with this. If we continue reading, it says this. In verse 5, it says, "These men said, we should not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God." I love this because we as Christians, when we find that we have integrity, when we can stand in the store of our boss when we work and we can stand there and we won't steal the money out of the register that's sitting open that he had left. When we're able to give good account and we're able to sell things to other people and not try to cheat them. We're able to just do our job wholly and truly. And we do it with perfection. The idea is that we have integrity, and what happens is with integrity comes jealousy from others. And see, what they do is these officials, they become jealous. And they walk up to Daniel and they decide that since they can't find anything against his integrity, they do what the world does to us. And they try to find some way to test his faithfulness to God. Isn't this so true that in your life, when integrity is high, when you will find yourself thoughtless before man, that because of jealousy, they find and try to test your faithfulness to God. Mm-hmm. And this is exactly what happens in Daniel. So as we continue reading, it says in verse 6, "These high officials and satraps, they came by agreement." I love this, they came by agreement. They all agreed to the king and said to him, "O King Darius, live forever. All the high officials of the kingdom and the prefects and the satraps and the counselors and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction, that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except you, O king, should be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document, so that it cannot be changed according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, which cannot be revoked." And this is probably the most sad verse I've ever seen in the Bible. Verse 9, "Therefore King Darius signed the document and injunction." See, this is another sermon for another time, but what I can tell you is this, that these men, they walked out and they began to play on the pride of Darius. They began to say, "Oh, King, live forever." They began to say, "Oh, Almighty King, you are great, you are worthy, and you should be God." Okay, if any person comes up to you and tells you you should be God, without actually saying you should be God, be wary of that. Because here's the thing, woe to you and woe to me if flattery ever becomes our downfall. The idea of this is that he let his pride get in the way of his friends. He let his pride get in the way of truth. And he did in verse 9 exactly what the saddest verse in the Bible, I think, is that he signed this injunction. He didn't give any thought to the outside reasoning. He didn't give any thought to who it might hurt. What happened was he just signed it because his pride got in the way. So let's continue reading. And here's the thing is that in verse 10 it says, "When Daniel knew that this document had been signed." Now I want you to understand this, that Daniel, when he knew that this document was signed, he did one thing, right? He clearly walked out into the town market and he walked out and he started saying, "Now did you hear what happened? Did you hear about this terrible king? We need him out of this government. I don't like this guy. He's playing on my rights," right? He walked up and he got on his scroll book and he got on his take a cartogram. Do you get that? Okay, I was hoping someone would do that. So here's the deal. They get on this and he starts posting pictures and he starts posting things. And he says, "I don't like this king. This king's awful. He's taken away my rights to pray in my schools, in my government, in my own life, in my own home. He's taken away my right to petition my God." He got up in arms and he got mad and he got angry, right?
No.
Let's look at verse 10. What does it say? It says, "When Daniel knew that this document had been signed, he went to his house where he had windows in his upper room open towards Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed, and he went before his God as he had done previously. Then these men came in agreement and found Daniel to petition and plead before his God." Daniel did one thing. Daniel prayed. Daniel didn't get up in arms and angry. Daniel didn't get so mad and just, ugh. He got down on his knees and prayed. And I imagine Daniel prayed something like this. Imagine Daniel prayed in a way that I think sometimes we find that when we're trying to be faithful, if you look at your next blank, if we try to be faithful in our prayer life, we find that we're not so faithful because, well, we forget to do the first thing, and I believe the first thing that Daniel did. It's the first thing that Daniel prayed about. If you read with me in verse 10, it says that he got down on his knees and he prayed and he gave thanks before his God. He didn't come before his God in anger. He didn't come before God saying, woe is me. He came before his God, he got down, and I believe he probably prayed like Matthew 5, and when Jesus prayed, he says, our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be your name, holy is your name, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. I believe that his focus was not on himself, it was on God, because that's where our prayers should be.
Amen.
Before you ever come before God and go, God fix me, God fix this, God do that, before you ever come with your demands, know that God Almighty is sitting and listening to you, and he has control over everything.
Amen.
That he is the Alpha, the Omega, the beginning, the Almighty, the end. And I want you to know how Daniel comes. He comes prostrate and he comes down on his knees with open windows, all in the open, proclaiming that he knows God. And he comes down and he gets on his knees. How many of us get down on our knees each and every day and pray? How many of us get down 3 times a day and pray? How many of us get down even once to pray or read? The idea is, he didn't just pray and thank God. I also believe that if you look in verse 11, it says that these men found him making petition and plea. See, after he focused on God, after he focused on the most important thing in life, he began to ask God for 2 things, I believe, with his petition and plea. And in the situation, I believe we should also do this in every situation. He prayed for 2 things. He prayed for wisdom, and he prayed for guidance. I see this because I know that in Psalms 25, 4 through 5, I can read this to you. It says, make me to know your ways, O Lord. Teach me your paths. Lead me in your truth and teach me. For you are the God of my salvation. For you I will wait all the day long. I want you to understand that that verse is praying for guidance. It's praying to make your ways known. God, show me and lead me and teach me all the ways that you go. See, the thing is Daniel didn't pray, God, show me everything so I can lead you. Daniel got down on his knees, and I believe he prayed, God, lead me, guide me. But on top of this, I also believe he prayed for wisdom, because daily we need wisdom. Am I wrong? How many of us have the perfect amount of wisdom right now? Okay, the idea is that we always need wisdom in every situation and every dealing. And when we don't have wisdom, we begin to fall short, we begin to act erratically, we begin to act in a manner that is not according to God. In James chapter 1, verse 5, he says, if you desire wisdom, then ask. And while that's a rough paraphrase, it's simply this, that if you desire wisdom and you want wisdom, God is faithful and generous to give it. So just ask. And I believe that Daniel knew this, and Daniel, before it was ever written in James, Daniel was the one who began to pray, and he's the one who, from years and years before, he knew that they prayed for the same thing, for guidance and for wisdom. And this was his petition and plea. Before trials, we must be faithful in our actions and be faithful in our prayer life. Again, like that geyser. Before we can have the trial, before we can have the eruption, before anything happens above ground, before must come. Before must happen. And we must be filled. The way we're filled is, again, being faithful in our actions with the world and our dealings with the world, and being faithful in our prayer life and our dealings with God. You know, in Matthew chapter 7, it says, again, a rough paraphrase of the parable of a house that was built on a rock, and a house that was built on the sand. And a lot of us may know this, but if you don't know this, if I build something on a rock, when storms come through, is it going to stand or is it going to sink? Okay, let me try this again. If I build something on a rock, is it going to stand or is it going to sink when the waters and the waves and the storms of life begin to come in? Is that house going to sink or stand?
Stand.
But in the middle of sand, sinking sand, what's it going to do?
Sink.
Okay, good. I gave you the word. Great. So, the idea of this is that this house does not have a foundation. Again, before anything can happen, if we don't have a foundation, we fall into the sand when storms of life come. When the trials come, when we try to strap on that armor real quick, we begin to be hit, be hurt, get our defenses down, and our defense is not as it should be. We begin to fall, and we begin to be tossed and turned in the storms of life. But when we're built on the rock, and we're founded on God, and our prayer life we're faithful in that, and we're faithful in our actions, and we begin to be faithful to God in those things before the trials ever come. In the midst of trials, like that house on that rock, it will always, and it always will, stand. And that's the most amazing thing, is that what we see here is, if we continue reading, we're going to actually start reading in verse 14, but I'll summarize 12 through 13, and it's this, that these men basically said, "Hey, king, you remember that whole deal about you signed that form? Yeah, Daniel's not obeying it." And I love this concept because they said, but he makes petition 3 times a day. And this is a side note, this is a little extra. If we as Christians are known for, and our only fault is that we pray 3 times a day, again, you're doing things right. Okay, I'm just saying. And so it's amazing. But let's read and pick up in verse 14. It says, "Then the king, when he heard these words, that Daniel was, he had just been found guilty, he was much distressed, and he set his mind to deliver Daniel, and he labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, 'Know, O king, that it is law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can ever be changed.'" He said, "This is permanent. This is permanent." Do you understand this? That the hopes to saving Daniel that the king was trying to put out, the friend that the king had named Daniel, was not going to be saved by the king's hand. I find this a little funny because these men are saying, it's not going to happen, you're not going to save him. And he's trying real hard, Darius is trying so hard to save Daniel. And I think it's kind of funny because I see God's fingerprint on this verse. I see God's provision because I see God saying, yeah, you're right. Darius, you ain't ever going to save him. You ain't ever going to rescue him. But guess what? I am. And I love this because it's God's fingerprint through the text. So let's read this verse. It says in verse 16, "This is my final thought. The king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the lion's den." Now I want you to understand that Daniel was one thing, and this is your last blank, but Daniel was, because he was faithful in his actions, because he was faithful in his prayer life, way before the trials ever came, in the midst of this trial, because he had a strong foundation, he was one thing, and that was steadfast. And that's your next point, is steadfast, because we see that he had to be steadfast, because if you understand this, I know myself. I know where I stand, and if I'm facing lions, things that could bite me, I don't even like dogs. Little tiny yippy dogs. I don't even like those because I don't want to get bit. I bought a hamster one time. I bought it for $5, and I brought it back the next day because when I picked it up, he started nibbling on it. I can't do that. So I know in myself, steadfast with a bunch of lions is really, really far off. But Daniel was. Notice this, that Daniel was steadfast in 3 ways. You see, from the time he prayed and he broke the law of the Medes and the Persians, but he kept the law of his God, to the time that he was thrown in the lion's den, Daniel was steadfast in that he remained present. See, many of us, when trial comes and tribulation comes, we decide we're going to hightail it, we're going to run it, right? We're just going to take off because we don't want to deal with it and it's not going to happen. We're not willing to face it. We're not willing to get in the face of this trial. We're willing to turn, tuck tail, and run. The idea is that's not what Daniel did. Daniel remained present in this. So we as Christians should also remain present. Because the old saying is true that when you run from problems, problems just get what? They get bigger. They get worse. Daniel knew this. Daniel remained faithful. He remained steadfast. He also remained present. Part of his steadfastness was not just his presence, but he remained peaceful. Peaceful is the next one. He remained peaceful. He didn't fight. He didn't start throwing fists. He didn't start punching people in the face and getting angry. He didn't start cussing and yelling and screaming and saying all things and curses and all sorts of things, right? It said, "And the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the lion's den." Didn't say he fought. Didn't say he struggled. He says he came and he went. He remained peaceful. And I believe before Jesus ever said it, he understood these words, that in Matthew chapter 6, when Jesus says, don't worry, God has a plan, I believe Daniel knew that and understood that. So for you, Christian, when you're facing trials, you must remain peaceful. You must remain in a way that is so lack of worry, so lack of anxiousness, because you trust God so much. You must trust God and leave worry behind and remain peaceful. The last thing I see in his steadfastness is that he had purpose. Daniel had purpose, and he knew it. Do you know what his purpose was? His purpose was this. In Psalms 34:3, it says, "Oh, magnify the Lord with me, exalt his name together. Oh, amplify the name of the Lord. Oh, magnify. Oh, glorify. Oh, bring the name of the Lord higher than it could ever go. Let the Lord's name be above all else." And this is what this verse is saying. All of that is the Lord is much higher than us. And Daniel understood that his purpose was not to share with the king the name of the Lord, not to pray 3 times daily, not to do this, not to do that. Those were ways he carried out his mission. But his mission was this, to glorify God. And that's it. And he understood that the purpose of his life, whether in death or in life, or in hardship or in easy life, easy breezy, whether with riches or poverty, whether with fame and fortune or with no name, he understood that his purpose is to glorify God. You see, Daniel understood that even unto death, he was to be faithful and steadfast in the midst of the trial.